Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the Smart Wealth Podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now. Hello, everybody. My name is Thane Stenner. I'm your host of the BNN Bloomberg Smart Wealth Podcast, which is a monthly podcast brought to you by many streaming platforms, including iHeartRadio. And we're very pleased to say that our listenership and viewership are rapidly growing across Canada and in the United States. And very pleased to see that because we're trying our very best to bring you some excellent talent and experts in different fields each month. So thank you for tuning in today. I'm very pleased to be introducing my guest here today, Richard Deacon. Say hello to the audience, Richard.
Well, hello, everyone.
So thanks for taking the time, Richard, out of your busy schedule. But again, very, very fortunate to have him here today. Before I get into his bio, today's topic is, instead of return on investment, which is the wealth management field that I'm kind of in, I'm the founder of Stenner Wealth Partners of CG Wealth Management. Instead of talking about investments and different things like that today, we thought we'd pivot a little bit and do a lifestyle session. So as Richard rightly coins, we're going to do a return on lifestyle or an ROL type session today. And I think you'll find it very interesting. So why did I invite Richard on today? Richard happens to be arguably one of the very top realtors in British Columbia and Western Canada. And he's part of an award-winning private office real estate advisory group, which is a luxury real estate firm called Engel and Volkers. And he's now been up in the Colona Okanagan area, part of BC, for those of you who are not as familiar, but huge development up in that area. People seem to be immigrating or migrating, I should say, to the interior British Columbia for a higher ROL, return on lifestyle. And so today, I think you're going to find to be a very fun session. Before we jump in, I wouldn't mind giving a little bit more about Richard's background. As I mentioned, he's arguably the top real estate expert up in the interior or the Okanagan area. And he really knows kind of what's going on up there. He's tapped into a lot of the top entrepreneurs, the municipalities, the plans for the various cities and townships in that area. And he's seen rapid growth even since he's moved from the Vancouver area up into the interior area with his wife and kids. So his background, Richard and I got to know each other from 25 years ago. And the last 15 years, we both started Tiger 21 Canada. So he was co-founder with me in that endeavor, which is a group of ultra net worth investors from across Canada and around the world, which manages around $135 billion US in assets overall. Richard's had also, aside from being a very skilled realtor, has had a 20-year career in the media and advertising area, working with the billionaire Thompson family and the Globe and Mail, which is actually where one of the ways that I got to know Richard extremely well. So he moved from Vancouver up to the interior in 2021 to help form that Engel and Volkers private real estate office up there. And I think, would it be fair to say, Richard, you've seen a lot of growth from then till now in the last 3-4 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Quick correction, up here 2017, 2021, though, we definitely have seen a fast track to growth. So looking forward to talking about that and how it really mirrors or marries with lifestyle. Because we cannot forget ROI when we talk about ROL. Of course, on this podcast, I'd be in trouble if I didn't.
Well said. And just to finish off with some of your background and bio there, Richard, he's a passionate and connected philanthropist. He's had a significant list of volunteer engagements and involvements, including roles with the National Advertising Benevolent Society. He's been inducted into the Canadian Advertising Hall of Honor in Toronto, past director of the children's charity Arts Umbrella, of which you and I also were involved with. national judge for the Courage to Come Back Awards, and many, many other endeavors which I know you're highly charitable minded and community minded, Richard. So let's get started then. We've got kind of I think out of the gate, we've got a lot of things to talk about because there's a lot of areas that this podcast can go. But I think out of the gate, what would you say you're finding in like, you hadn't lived up there before, you moved up in 2017. So just maybe describe, first of all, what you've observed so far in the last 6, 7 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So our family actually first looked at Kelowna about 20 years ago. We were living in downtown Vancouver. We hadn't started a family. I was just coming together with my wife of now 15 years. And we had come up here on vacation like many people. We'd skied at Big White or Silver Star, really used it like many did in those peak seasons, whether as that winter ski season or the summer boating and beach season. Never really given it a serious look. And then we started to notice friends, family, clients. This is pre-real estate career for me, in both the media space and the connections to some of our Tiger 21 colleagues and members. And we couldn't ignore it. So we actually, as Thane knows, we bought a ranch not too far from Kelowna and played sort of halftime cowboy. It was a really lifestyle thing for us. And I think it was the first pre-coining of the phrase ROL, or return on lifestyle. It was my first foray and the family's first foray, pardon me, into enjoying a bit of lifestyle that we didn't have on a day-to-day basis in Vancouver. So by owning that piece of property outside of a town called Merritt, we would come to Kelowna for date night to Quail's Gate Winery, to the organic grocery. And we really got to know the city actually outside of those peak seasons. And we started to pay attention. It was still early stage for us. It was a bit of an awkward teenager, maybe like a 12, 13-year-old. And I have one of those boys, so I know what that stage is like. And hadn't quite found its way. Development hadn't quite happened. This photo that's in the background is probably not quite that old, but it's probably from 10 years ago. And, there were developments there. You can see the arena, you can see the yacht club, some of the developments that are famous downtown Kelowna. But some of the big money from Alberta, from Toronto, even some of the REITs and entrepreneurs that have now really just tumbled into the Kelowna space from a developer perspective hadn't arrived. Second phase was friends of ours, a number of friends, as I said, and clients started to move here. And we thought, oh my gosh, what's happening? These are people from Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, some international. And again, they could choose to move anywhere. Many of them mobile in their businesses, very pre-COVID, but still had that ability. So we started tracking that. And that led us to a decision in 2015-16 to exit the Lower Mainland and look at Kelowna. Now, there was some of that equation or that determining about that move was around value equation. So at the time, I would say it was a 2-for-1. You could, sell a house out in Greater Vancouver and sort of either put some money in the bank or build an incredible house in the Okanagan. So for us, it led to that stage of where we really looked at the city. And I remember turning to my wife, Marianne, and saying, this city has really hit its stride. It's gone from being that awkward kind of preteen to, a young, confident teenager with a bit of education and maybe some finances and foundation behind them. And it seemed to be trending in the right direction. And what's happened since then, which we're going to talk about today, is simply phenomenal. Now is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. So really, it was about being outside of the seasons that it was known for. Always a fun and vibrant place in the summer and the winter. But those shoulder seasons really were very weak, and there was not a lot of wineries that were open. Tumbleweeds would still kind of roll down the middle of the main street, if you will. Yep. And that has really changed.
So how would you describe the vibe? Like, kind of, you're living in Kelowna now. Does it feel like a mini city? What does it feel like to you, given the fact that you've kind of lived in a city yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do we still miss the big cities? Absolutely. But one of the most important things is the airport's expansion over the last few years. Ninth busiest airport in the country. Connections to multiple cities, be in Vancouver in 45 minutes flight, same to Calgary, direct flights to Toronto, Seattle. It's not a Vancouver or a Pearson as far as a connection hub, But it's a very easy airport to navigate. And I will note they still load the bags with John Deere tractors, which a little bit like Abbotsford Airport outside of Vancouver still does. So I love that as a part-time country boy. But what we've noticed is just the level. Everything has leveled up. The service, the types of offerings, the hip factor. It still has what a lot call the California or the Colona Fornia effect. So you still get a lot of that laid back kind of flip flop lifestyle, but you've really seen a level up when it comes to just call it the sophistication of a market like this. And what's interesting is a couple of the clients of mine that have moved here in the last 5 to 7 years, entrepreneurs, mainly from, let's say, the GTA or even Montreal tech and sort of sustainable space. They coin it like a combination between cities like Park City in the States, Austin, Texas, Boulder, Colorado, cities that have now capital around them to support businesses that attract a younger demographic, certainly of employees and entrepreneurs that want access to the outdoors. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's the key. Is as much as the towers are growing up, and there's venture capitalists that moved in, let's say, it still really is about the lake and the mountains and the lifestyle.
Gotcha. So, you're growing a young family yourself there, and how have they adapted?
Like anything, I think we moved here at the right time. If we had waited a few more years, the kids would have been more entrenched and difficult to pull them out when they get into those teenage years. But for us, young family kids, were under the age of 8. It was easy. I think what I will say is this city is extremely easy to live in. The Okanagan Valley is, and I don't mean easy in what I would say a track pants or a jogging pants kind of way. That's good for the gym or those lazy
Yeah.
Saturday mornings. But what I mean easy is just easy in a sense of, traffic. You might wait 4 or 5 minutes on your commute. That's the worst it's going to be. There's sometimes where I was driving some people around this last week, actually from Toronto, and there wasn't a single car for about 15 streetlights in front of us on one of the major streets at 9:30 in the morning. And they were just flabbergasted. They said, there'd be thousands of cars in Toronto if this were the same street. We're actually talking about how this was a very busy street. So
Yeah.
it's still a very easy jurisdiction to navigate. Now, it's underserviced, maybe from an infrastructure perspective, still somewhat limited, by farmland and the lake and the mountains, but are very, very easy city to live in and to operate, with your family. And that goes for the whole Okanagan. Kelowna is the epicenter and has a population that's, the largest in the valley. But once you get out to some of the other jurisdictions, it's even easier.
So what is the population of Greater Kelowna area and the overall Okanagan overall?
Yeah, I look at the valley. So if you think about the Okanagan Valley, huge area, when you describe it, and I laugh sometimes because people often say, well, they're looking at the valley to move, and they might, this is a classic example of this weekend. I was down in Soyuz, and I was up in almost Armstrong. So that on the map, don't quote me, would be at least probably 150 kilometers long. The lake itself is 120, 130 kilometers long, 100 miles as we call it. So that's a large lake that obviously forms a good part of the valley. And the reason I laugh is that, sometimes people look at the Okanagan and they think, oh, well, maybe I could pick a Soyuz, or I could pick Peachland, or I could pick Vernon, Kelowna, et cetera. And they don't realize the geographic span of how large of a region that it is. Now, you can drive that in 2 hours. Well, it takes some people 2 hours to get across the GTA or even Vancouver. And many cities around the world. So sometimes, this is motivated by the fact that they just don't have a problem with driving or navigating, let's say, large distances. So we're about a 300,000 population valley. Largest city being Kelowna, in that sort of 150,000 plus range. You throw in West Kelowna, you kind of get up over 200,000, and then you layer in Penticton, Vernon, and some of the other cities in between.
So as far as population growth or migration growth into the valley, like the last 20 years, it's probably come close to doubling.
Yeah, it certainly has. And I think what's most important to note, or the interesting discussion, is who's coming here. So Kelowna, known for retirement, known for vacationers. Folks from Alberta had second homes here, and still do. But that number has gone down from at one point being as high as 20% of the population, those from Alberta that had, second homes or a base here, to, sort of, you can argue it, but in that sort of 7 to 10% range. And that's not because necessarily, the oil patch or Alberta's down. In fact, as you know, it's doing well these days. It's just a diversification of who's come here. And if you had to ask me in an elevator of who the not just ideal client of mine is or who we're dealing with, but it is a 35 to 50 something family, entrepreneurial, business owner, generally in a space that is tech or something that is, called the modern or sustainable economy related, maybe a B Corp. But at the core is a founder and or their family and or maybe a group of founders that just want to live in a market that has that lifestyle. Now, they don't want to give up or didn't want to give up access to capital and talent, the importance of an airport and the importance of also, business, if you will. And that was something that only Colona has come into its stride in these last few years. It was a bit of an outpost for many years, always successful in the hospitality and tourism space, obviously agriculture at its roots. Incredible story of those coming over from Europe and founding the first vineyards here 100 plus years ago, the orchards, and also incredible immigration and migration to those spaces. But when I talk about that kind of entrepreneurial family or new individual that's moving here now from big cities, they're coming with the expectations that this is a much more sophisticated city. They're looking around saying, what can we invest in? What can we volunteer in? Who can we connect with? What kinds of arts and culture institutions do you have? We have them starting up mountain bike clubs and things like they did back in many where they came from. So, very interesting just to see that advent of growth, not just in the pure business space, but in the community as well.
Sounds like you're almost becoming like the mayor of the region there, Richard. I mean,
now careful. If I had $1 for every time somebody suggested, maybe even you think that we should be in politics, but no, thank you. We'll let the people that are much more talented do that.
We're just going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Richard Deacon. Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the Smart Wealth podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now. Welcome back, everybody. We just had a quick break. We want to jump right back in with Richard Deacon. So tell us, the listeners and the viewers, a little bit more about Engel and Volkers, like their background, kind of its network, etc.
Yeah. Well done pronouncing it correctly, because that's not the easiest firm. Engel and Volkers is how you would say it if you were German. So that is the name of two individuals that founded the firm back in the late 70s. And Christian Volkers to this day, who is an absolute legend on the I call it the royalty circuit in Europe. Once dated Claudia Schiffer, which I don't think you and I can say, but kudos to Mr. Volkers. So Christian Volkers, and full disclosure, in this day and time, he sold a good portion of the firm, I believe a 50% stake, to a private equity firm, Primera, a couple of years ago, with a goal of really expanding what had been built over the last 40 years. So Engel & Volkers was created in Hamburg to really offer that elevated experience right from day one. He called his realtors or his real estate agents advisors. Much like the space that you're in, there's folks that trade and do the basics. And, there's a firm like yours in Stenner Wealth Partners that just go that extra mile and really consult with families and try to build long-term relationships and figure out where do we fit in that incredible space of high net worth and an ultra high net worth family's needs, often working with accountants and lawyers, sometimes months and years before a transaction happens. And, in our case, of course, we get paid transactionally, when a purchase or a sale happens. But sometimes, we put in years and months of effort to assist that family and their team in navigating a market, understanding opportunities when it comes to purchasing and selling properties. So Engel & Volkers now exists, I think, in almost 40 countries. It is not the largest firm in the world, but it is the largest pure luxury firm in the world. I'm sure somebody would debate those numbers, but certainly it is a huge presence in and across Europe. I think one of the things that I find just fascinating is the number of clients that will send me a photo in front of an Engel & Volkers office somewhere on vacation. So I've probably had a contest actually last summer because it was just so overwhelming. So I've got to give away something special here for all these people that are sending these photos. So I think we ended up with over 100 families that had sent us photos from their holidays around the world in front of an Engel & Volkers office. And in my true fashion, gave away a legendary gift basket, some of that of which I learned from you, in gifting and giving incredible things to clients. So a big footprint around the world. We have an aviation division, private aviation division, helping clients purchase and secure private aircraft. We have a yachting division, which does and brokers some incredible both leases and sale and purchases of yachts around the world. England Volkers came to the Americas in the last sort of dozen years or so, and has just rapidly expanded across both the US and Canada. I think you'll find us in roughly 40, 50 markets in Canada, many times that in the US. And, like our office here in Kelowna, a dozen, sort of 10 advisors working at the top of their game. Not a large office. Remax, for example, or Royal LePage in our market would have 200 advisors. So we're competing really, and we're representing clients that are in that ultra high net worth and high net worth space, looking for sophisticated advice, looking for us to be able to plug in, and especially my private office network. So private office is a designation within England Volkers. We have about 300 in total out of 15,000 in the world. So there's not many of us, but at the same time, there's one in almost every market that matters. And I'll give you a great example. I mean, I have clients all the time that call and they're asking to purchase in Nice or, in the Middle East, in Dubai, or they just want some market knowledge of something in a market like, let's say, the London in the UK, or even markets across Canada that might not be as sexy. I was just in Barrie, Ontario, pouring some Okanagan wines a few weeks ago, and we have a private office colleague there. And I had a client that was looking at investing in purchasing a condo tower there. So we have that, that ability, much like a firm like yours and your network, Thane, to plug into what I would call very similar or like-minded, best-in-class individuals in markets around the world to really service the needs of clients that are very common to firms like yours and mine.
Excellent description. So give us a range of real estate that you tend to market in the Valley, in Kelowna and in Kelowna proper, today. Like, kind of what sort of range, and what's been the largest real estate transaction done to date, not necessarily by your office, but up in Okanagan, just to give people kind of a sense as to where pricing has gone over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give you an example, when we came here in that 2016, 2017 timeframe, we decided to build a house. And now that was definitely a good choice. We built right at the right time before cost skyrocketed. But we purchased a starter house just to live in while we carried the lot that we had and built a house. And that house at the time, I think we bought for $600,000 and would now be worth about $1 million, $1.1 million. It was just a very basic house. We wanted to live a few doors down from when we were building. And so that gives you an example. Our house that we built for about $2 million with pool and everything all in. And, absolute dream house for sure. That house today would be worth about $4 million. So, the market has definitely trended up. Now, I say this with lots of caveats and as we have to in the investment world for sure, just on market conditions. And, you can't sell a $4 million property here in Kelowna overnight, even if it is unique. It takes some time. But let's just look at a couple of benchmarks. So $10 million, great number. There's not a lot of transactions that happen every year, let's say, in a market like this for $10 million. Believe it or not, there's not that many that happen anywhere. I mean, you would be hard-pressed to find a $10 million sale of a single-family residence or a condo, let's say, in Calgary. Not that many, a little few more in Toronto, a few more in Montreal, but it's actually a fairly large number when you look at most markets, certainly in North America. Now, I get a wonderful newsletter from our top colleagues at my office in New York City. And, that's a poor man's apartment, if you will, in New York City. But in Kelowna, it's interesting. So in Kelowna, that would get you an absolutely legendary lakefront mansion. So I happened to have sold one a couple of years ago. It was the largest sale for a couple of years. Beautiful gated community called Shearwater, just maybe 7-8 minutes outside of downtown Kelowna, if that's sort of your measuring stick, but also in a very secluded part of kind of the north, the north end, right on the lake, private marina. Give you an example, two of the neighbors in there at the time were Daryl Katz from Rexall and Edmonton Oilers fame, and Lane Merrifield, Dragon's Den, former entrepreneur who sold his company to Disney for a few $100 million. So just some incredible estate homes. Private marina homes come with a slip and what's called a funicular or a tram down to the marina. These are beautiful kind of steep lots carved out of a granite hillside. So $10 million house, 10,000 square feet. Modern, absolute masterpiece. Award-winning design. I think it won Home of the Year by an arm's length when it was in the competition a few years back. It had the kind of architectural details that you just don't, I mean, you absolutely world class. It had a spa, a gym, a nail salon. My favorite was it had a sunken conversation pit theater room. So it had a conversation pit, which are popular back, I think, in the 60s and 70s in sort of the hippie heyday, but it was built in this beautiful modern way, sunk right into the concrete with a screen above it. So just a phenomenal place. A lot of people collect cars up here. Some for show, some for ROI and ROL. But many of them come from markets like Calgary, let's say, where you can't drive your cars for many months of the year, because it's cold or there's snow on the roads, or you just wouldn't. So you'll find people that often have a half dozen, 8 cars here. And, seems like a crazy thing, but they actually want the storage and the space to be able to store those cars. So fascinating. Let's look down at $5 million. So $5 million is going to get you either a decent home on the lake in one of the top neighborhoods, not a modern masterpiece like the one I just described, but a very nice, probably 4,000 square foot home, beachfront, minutes to downtown Kelowna, probably maybe even in the Golden Mile, which is a golden piece of sand in the Lower Mission, just off of, say, where the El Dorado is, the Hotel El Dorado, which you can fly into on a float plane. It'll be an older home, so maybe 15 to 20 years old. May have had some updates, probably about a third of an acre lot. And you would typically have a boat dock or a pier with that, where you could dock your boat and jet ski. Or for that same price point, you could move up into the hills. In fact, we sold a home for $5 million in a beautiful community called High Point, Tiger 21 member a couple of years ago. And this was just incredible. I called it the Hollywood Hills Mansion, or something you'd find in Scottsdale, Paradise Valley. Just an incredible home, 7,000 square feet, had a separate 3-story structure that had a bunker gym. This fellow at the time was training for some CrossFit and some pretty significant training. Just incredible bunker gym. Second floor had essentially a suite or a guest quarters. And then on top of that, just this beautiful office that opened up the doors to the outside, and you could see for miles and miles. So that was a really incredible home. It also won some awards, award-winning builder. It wasn't on the water, had a view, but not actually a direct lake view, more of a city and mountain and valley view. Elevator, room for the cars, and just incredible, as you can imagine, finishings and attention to detail. So that was about a $5 million property in High Point, which is probably the #1 gated community inside the city limits of Kelowna. If we jump down to $2.5 million, a fairly common number here in Kelowna. I realize for a typical, city or maybe a smaller market, that would be maybe even the top end or something out of reach. It's sort of the entry point for luxury, or what I would call entry-level luxury here. That's going to get you a nicely appointed home with a lake view in a top family neighborhood. So perhaps a neighborhood like a Wilden, Upper Mission, the Ponds, Kettle Valley. These are all top neighborhoods, or McKinley Landing, which is a beautiful neighborhood on the outskirts of Kelowna as well. It's going to get you 4,000 or 5,000 square feet. Your typical finishings, beautiful designer appliances, granite countertops, 4 or 5 bedrooms, gorgeous pool, hot tub, maybe an outdoor kitchen, and certainly some staggering lake views. So that kind of gives you those ideas of a few different price points. You can still get into this market for $1 million. You can certainly pick up condos between $500,000 and $1.5 million. We'll talk in a moment, I'm sure, about some of the development that's underway, but that's where there's definitely some opportunity.
Actually, that's exactly where I was going next. So, that right behind you is I don't want to say an antiquated picture of Kelowna, because there's a lot more development and buildings that are already there. But how would you describe kind of the development pace there right now?
Well, if only my Sharpie, which you may not be able to see in my screen here, could mark up that downtown skyline. So just over my shoulder, you'll see that's Prospera Place, so the arena, home of the Kelowna Rockets. I know you're a big hockey fan, and also brings in local concerts and whatnot. Just in front of that is what most people associate with downtown Kelowna, the casino and the Marriott or the Delta Grand. And there's a whole strip along there called Sunset Drive. And Sunset Drive essentially was built up to be a bit of a combination of call it condo hotel, so to service that short-term and vacation rental market. Now, we won't go there because there's lots of changes that have happened in British Columbia recently around short-term rentals. We'll save that for maybe a political guest that you might have down the road. But that just to give you an idea, a lot of development had happened in that part of town, and continues to. So if we could sketch on that particular background behind me today, you would see at least 8 to 10 new towers, and those towers starting at 20 stories and going up to 40 stories. So, it doesn't seem like much if you're listening to this podcast in a major center around the world, but we have more development underway right now, not just downtown, but between downtown and a couple of our secondary cores within the city of Kelowna than in any point in history. And even to people that come from, let's say, Vancouver or Toronto, where there's an awful lot of cranes, as you know. I mean, as long as we've been around and know each other thing, we travel to Toronto and Vancouver, and it's sometimes staggering to see the cranes and the development.
Yep.
You sometimes have to shake your head in Kelowna and think, Kelowna, like, how is this happening? I mean, this is a small or a mid-sized city. And, you have sometimes on a particular block, 5 towers being constructed. And I know we're going to talk in a moment about some of the entrepreneurs that are doing things and people that are investing in this market. But there's some big names. It used to just be your local developers. Mission Group is a great example of a very well-regarded local developer who's built many towers, and they either have underway right now or just completed, I think, 4 or 5 towers between the Lower Mission and downtown. But you've now seen regional players come in from Vancouver. You've seen money from REITs and pension funds from Toronto and Alberta that have partnered with developers, and you're just seeing this staggering growth. And part of it was that the city, in this whole description about the evolution of a city growing up a bit from that awkward preteen, part of it was the city is, you had some favorable council and leadership. You had some talents from a city planning perspective, and really a support and an underpinning to grow development in this market over the last 5 years, and you've seen that, and that's really helped push a lot of these projects through, and they updated what's called the OCP, or the official community plan, for 2040 to really push both rezoning and densification, some infill housing like many cities have done. And really, I think for a city of its size is outpacing many larger jurisdictions from a standpoint of what we're allowing. Now, some will say, well, don't like growth, don't like development, not in my backyard. Sure, I suppose there's still some of that here in this market. We've got lots of agricultural land. We've got a lake that you can see, and we've got mountains that limit us. So with the land that we do have available for development, it has become a lot easier for those developers. One interesting thing to note is at in the very north end of downtown. So there's a district that's called the North End. So these beautiful little homes, that back in the day were cottages, or many of them even what they called picker shacks. So small little 1950s homes or earlier for people that worked in the orchards and the agricultural industry, has become a bit of a hipster downtown. So in Vancouver, it would maybe be like a little bit of the East End or the east side of Vancouver, Main Street, etc. Some of the areas in Toronto, let's say like Cabbage Town or Lower East Side in New York City. Every city has them. Where sort of the hipsters move in, and maybe slightly becomes gentrified. You see breweries, you see coffee shops, all these things that happen. So that's happened. Yes, it has pushed up prices for sure. And now you're looking at land values being, sometimes even a little tricky for developers to pick up. But there's a very interesting parcel. So there was a huge parcel that was a mill. So the Thorlison family and Tolko had a giant mill that many knew for, and this is also where a teenager starts to grow up, right? The teenager loses his spots and maybe combs his hair and, gets a little bit more polished, looks a bit more like his dad. And things happen. So in the case of Kelowna, I part of maybe why people like ourselves didn't think that Kelowna was for us, let's say 10, 12 years ago, was it still had a large working mill in its downtown. I mean, I get it. There's industry but that, how do you say you're world class per se when you've got a mill right in your downtown, and mills create dust and pollution and aren't the easiest thing to market, let's say, to international tourists and investors. So that mill closed down a number of years ago. It's been dismantled, and there is a master plan to develop that huge piece of land in the North End, which is just over my shoulder, behind where the arena is, into a world-class community. So if you think about some communities that have had, let's say, the Olympics in Vancouver and what it did to the Expo lands or the Athletes Village. I mean, these are communities now that are just world-class in their connectivity and, their urban planning. And so Kelowna's got a real opportunity to take some marquee parcels of land that were former industrial and, sort of in a former century or life of use into the future. And I think that's what's really important when you think about a city growing up and maybe why some of these developers are spending the money and making the bets that they are on building.
I agree. And let's continue this thought. You and I both know some of the, either personally or from a distance, some of the top entrepreneurs that have come into that area. I mean,
Yeah,
Bill Milroy, you and I both know Dennis O'Rourke is doing some amazing things. And you'd know even more details about that.
yeah,
Marcus Friend of Plenty of Fish kind of fame, has done a substantial amount of work there. Obviously, Anthony Von Mandel
yeah,
of Mission Hill, Mike's Hard Lemonade, and White Claw and as such. So I mean, there's been tremendous amount of, I mean, the Glardy family, right, is very prominent there as well. So maybe just touch upon, like, those are some
yeah.
world class projects that they're working on that are I think, I yeah, I would say Kelowna and the Valley area are, you know rapidly growing up.
Right.
Uh,
Well,
yeah.
yeah,
So,
legit people, as the cool kids would say, and legit investments. Let's just talk a little bit about what they're doing because I mean, it is incredible. And obviously, full disclaimer, I've got the photo over the shoulders. We're all in here as a family, and my job is to move people and capital and whatnot to the valley. So
yeah,
understand I'm biased, I suppose, but at the same time, I can live anywhere. And we've talked about it. We're headed off this afternoon,
yep.
on a global trip on holiday. So we get around and we see incredible markets. And I think what is absolutely staggering. I was on a boat yesterday afternoon and was talking to a fellow that's a very seasoned mortgage broker in the business. And we were just looking back at the city and not even at the growth. And his wife said, and she's from Germany, um, this could be anywhere. But we're here and it's such an easy city. This has a vibe of California, of southern markets in the US, a little bit of Southern Europe. But the safety and the accessibility of many things that people look for when it comes to Canada. So let's use that as a bit of a theme because why does a Phil Milroy, Dennis O'Rourke, Mr. K, Bannister family, on and on and on, why did they invest in and want to base themselves in a market like the Okanagan? I mean, safety is one thing. So safety when it comes to your family, your lifestyle, your capital, all of the above. I mean, Canada obviously still has an incredible track record when it comes to that and that's not likely to change. Maybe just get better as things change over the next few years, government, et cetera. But a great track record there. So let's just look at some of these projects. So Phil Milroy, Westcorp, wonderful gentleman, as you know, Edmonton-based developer for 50 years, maybe longer. This is a cowboy. This is a guy that flies his own private plane, doesn't need to fly it. And if you do get an invite to fly with Phil, don't sit in the back like I did on the first trip. You get up in the jump seat and you're manning controls, even if you haven't had any kind of crash course. And don't talk to him until you get up to 36,000 feet, and then you can bring out the ham sandwich. And on my last flight with Phil to Toronto, that was 3 hours of absolutely legendary mentorship. And Thane's great. Those of you that know Thane like I do, when you get a chance to sit around people like that, you soak it up. Anyway, so Phil is building out a site with two very, very substantial partners that are, billionaire status called Ledge on Lakeshore. So Ledge on Lakeshore is the former Hiawatha campground site right at the heart of Lower Mission. For those of you that don't know Kelowna, it's right across the street from one of the best sandy beaches in town called Rotary Beach. It is across the street from the El Dorado Hotel, right in the heart of Lower Mission. Not downtown, but it is even better in my opinion. And so that site was purchased a number of years ago, record price at the time, and they let it continue as a campground and trailer park site for many, many years, and have started building it out over the last 2 years. Many things involved in developing things out. It has a natural water body going through it. There are some First Nations rights and burial and whatnot that they had to deal with along the way. So lots of sensitivities and in partnerships that they worked with. That site is being developed as 1,100 luxury rental units, 100% rental, above market when it comes to about 20% above market rental rates that they'll achieve when it's all built out. A number of towers, a number of stackable townhomes, and world-class amenities. So we are talking the types of amenities that maybe people are used to in some big urban centers, or when you see a project branded or launched in the US, let's say, that's a luxury branded project, like say Miami or Chicago or some of the big markets. Those have amenities that are essentially rival a resort or a hotel. But this community will have that. So there's one example of 1,100 units being built, at the heart of Lower Mission with Phil Milroy and a couple of his partners. Dennis O'Rourke, great friends with Phil, is building out a winery. He won't tell you how much, but the rumor is between $300 and $400 million spent to date. I hosted an event there a couple of weekends ago where we raised some money for charity. And I stood up and said, Dennis's famous quote is, "This is what you do when you're mad at your money." And held up my hands and looked around at this absolutely incredible venue. Dennis assembled dozens of properties over the last decade plus to create what he didn't need to do: 125,000 square foot winery, conference facility, and just best in class hospitality venue for the North Okanagan. And what's interesting there is right up the road, Predator Ridge. So many of you would know Predator Ridge, always been for the last 20 years, one of the best golf resort destinations in Canada. You've got Sparkling Hill, which has connections to the Swirsky family, that was built in the same jurisdiction. And when you think about the North Okanagan, not always getting the same headlines maybe as Kelowna. Vernon would be the epicenter of the North Okanagan, but Predator Ridge and what's going on there. Now that's backed by Mr. K and Westbuilt. Again, another absolutely solid world-class developer, with deep pockets, that's been building out a community there. Predator Ridge is bringing the first Ritz-Carlton residences project to Western Canada. In fact, the only other Ritzes in Canada are in Toronto and Montreal. And if you look around on the map, the Ritz doesn't just throw a project anywhere. And, I know I've had some, through our England Volkers development space, I've worked on a couple of these projects around the world. Branded residential is very popular in the US. So you'll see towers, especially in big markets, coming up, Four Seasons, St. Regis, you can kind of go on and on. But it's not all that common in Canada. You won't typically see branded residential very often outside of the major market. An absolute coup that Ritz-Carlton is coming to a jurisdiction like Predator Ridge. They're going to build 40 plus homes that are going to be in that $4 million range. Residences attached to a Ritz-Carlton residences amenities building. So like you would see at one of their resorts or hotels. So, again, another real check mark when it comes to what's happening in the Valley. We'll kind of rapid fire through a few others. Gagliardi family. So Gagliardi family is investing hundreds of millions of dollars to build out what's called RMR. So Revelstoke Mountain Resort, expanding the conference center, expanding the heli lodge and heli ski operations. The airport's been built out, building Cabot, Revelstoke. So Cabot is a partnership with the Cowan-Dewar family, who have Cabot from the East Coast, incredible resort golf courses. And they're building out Revelstoke to be, more than just that incredible ski destination. So there's another validation of an incredible family, and you can go on and on when you get into families that are doing things. You mentioned Marcus Friend. He's pushing the limits in the vineyards that he's planting and the properties that he's buying. He didn't need to do that. He had hundreds of millions of dollars from a great tech sale, could have gone anywhere, and is investing here in the Okanagan. Anthony Von Mandel. I mean, there's a fascinating story. So you've got a guy that not only created Mike's Hard Lemonade, then created White Claw, and now has a portfolio through the iconic wineries division of their incredible company, Von Mandel Family Estates. A dozen plus wineries, absolute best in class. So just, if I had a real picture behind me where I live, about probably a Thane Stenner 7-iron, but more like a 5 wood for me. Over our valley is Martin's Lane. So Martin's Lane is a winery that was built. I still stagger at its architectural beauty. He did not need to do that. He probably spent $50 million building this absolute architectural gem with Kundig Partners, a world-class architectural firm. Their wines are $150 a bottle to start. And they have a waiting list for their private membership. So, building things here that are absolutely next level. And I think a guy like that is such a visionary. And you and I know this thing when we talk to these ultra wealthy people, very often they've come from, or they are positioned as visionaries. They're creating a legacy. And somebody like Anthony, is planting and investing in thousands of acres of land in vineyards. but doesn't need to do. He didn't need to do these architectural significant buildings. I mean, he didn't need to take Cedar Creek that he purchased from the Fitzpatrick family and take it to the next level, which he did. So it's really it's just encouraging to see that, because that sets up a foundation for the next 20, 30 years, and it legitimizes. When you talk to people that work in private equity in Toronto, so you talk to a Tom at Kensington Capital, and why is he investing in Tom Kennedy at companies here in the Okanagan, and using the Okanagan much more than he did in the past, which he came to vacation in or golf in, now to look for founders and companies and opportunities, which I think really put a jurisdiction like this on the map, or give it a bit more of that seriousness. A bit like, I guess, when the teenager grows a bit more of a mustache.
Yep, exactly. So, I mean, again, a lot of young families also moving in, a lot of,
Right.
tech entrepreneurs. It's kind of interesting too. I mean, UBC, you haven't even mentioned UBC
Right.
Okanagan. I mean, that's a major.
Well, and here's what's fascinating. So UBC Okanagan, I mean, I suppose when it was launched was, probably the butt of jokes of certainly all of the academics down at the main flagship campus of UBC in Vancouver. There's a school that has doubled its student body. You go up to that campus now, and you marvel at the size of it, but also the legitimacy now of some of the research going on. So I'll give you an example. There's a wonderful fellow that I know, David Saltman, who's interesting. I mean, great example actually of a fellow from San Diego. Him and his wife. His wife had Canadian roots, but they chose to move back out here a number of years ago. Semi-retire, and he couldn't resist as he looked around Kelowna. Had no idea they wanted a California type environment because of their California Southern Cal roots in Canada. But wanted to be in Canada. Had no idea that the tech sector and the sort of renewable space that he came from would be where it is now. And he's now partnered with UBCO to do research around a product and a company that he has called Inca, which produces very interesting renewable products for the automotive industry and RV industry. And he's done that right here in Kelowna. You've got guys like you and I know, Brad Peterson, Matt Bertulli, who created a company called Pillacase, and then now Lomi, a sustainable B Corp that was based in Toronto. And they were looking around saying, well, if you ask Matt, he would use a couple of colorful 4-letter words and say, blank, yeah, that's why I moved to Kelowna. I can mountain bike, and so can all my employees or contractors, right after work. Or we can hit skiing and be back at our desks by 10 o'clock after skiing for an hour and a half. So these are guys that have chosen this market for lifestyle, now have been here 3, 4, 5 years, and are now looking around and partnering, investing, using local research. And then, of course, what they do after that is they want to invest and contribute philanthropically. So you've seen the benefit now of, like, for example, the Bannister family investing a $6 million donation recently in creating BC Cancer, and really amping up the type of service from a health perspective here in the Valley. You've got the art gallery and other cultural institutions that are benefiting from people that have come from big cities that are looking around saying, hey, what about in the winter when the lake isn't open and, we want to go and catch a show, or we want to see a performance. And that's really encouraging too, that sort of underpinning of these entrepreneurs coming here and now investing or contributing to the community.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Just going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Richard Deacon. Stay with us. Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the Smart Wealth podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now. Welcome back, everybody. We just had a quick break, and we're back with Richard Deacon. So we're coming up on the hour here, so I'm going to do a fun little exercise with you.
Yes.
This is the rapid fire popcorn round.
Popcorn, just like our kids did around the table for to say thanks or
Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna fire off a bunch of things,
okay.
And just want kind of your quickest thoughts that come to mind. Okay, Richard.
Okay.
So what's Kelowna best known for?
Ooh, sun and sand.
Ooh, interesting. Not even the winter season. That's intriguing. Okay. When people think of Okanagan, what do they say?
How can it be that beautiful? Is it really that beautiful?
Best thing about summer?
Ooh, best thing about summer, I'm going to say outside eating a fresh tomato salad on a balcony of your choice.
enjoying a nice Riesling or a glass
Yeah,
of
exactly. To go with it.
Champagne. Best thing about winter.
Yeah, the accessibility to the outdoors. Silver Star, Big White, Revelstoke, and then the absolute epicenter of both what's called heli skiing and cat skiing, which I knew nothing about until we moved here, and I've done them all now.
Fantastic. Population of the valley, once again, just to
Yeah, we
recap.
talked about 300,000 is kind of a good number to use from, north to south. Big geographical area, but that's sort of the number.
Gotcha, gotcha. Your what would people say is the favorite restaurant or two up there?
Oh gosh, I mean, people love Home Block at Cedar Creek, and that's where I had that burrata salad recently, tomato and bocconcini salad, if you will. Absolutely legendary. There's so many. We were just down at the Naramata Inn in Naramata, a 100-year-old hotel. Incredible as well, Naramata Inn. And Naramata, that whole little bench between, call it Penticton and maybe the middle of nowhere is very, very sought after. And that's a bit of a dark horse for me if you're interested in, the wine world or the restaurant world.
Your favorite wine? Actually, no.
Oh, Pinot
Your
Noir
wife.
is my
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
favorite.
whoa, 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 whoa. Richard, I'm gonna stop. Your wife's favorite wine.
She loves Riesling and Sauvignon Blancs, whites, but I love Pinot Noir.
Nice.
Martin's Lane would be probably at the top, followed by Cedar Creek and then some others.
Excellent. Best beach.
Ooh, I call it Secret Beach. I guess it's not anymore after being on a big podcast like this, but it is a beach in what's called Braylock, neighborhood just under Cedar Creek, Martin's Lane, where I live. I was there this morning. I kayaked at 6 a.m. Secret Beach in Braylock, Lower Mission, Kelowna.
Nice. Favorite new company.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I do love the guys. I'm an investor, so full disclosure in Lomi. But those are the boys from Pila, Matt Bertulli, Brad Peterson. There's some big names and big capital. They have created the world's first countertop compostable device where you can take your food scraps and turn it into dirt in 8 or 10 hours. Incredible. They're moving into the multifamily space, which is really interesting. So Lomi, Lomi, love it. And I love those guys that run it. They are powerhouses that came from Toronto. They don't belong here in the sense of they're not laid back at all. But those guys do it all. And it's actually it was that gang that forced me to come up with ROL, and now they all use it. So return on lifestyle, which is and I have it as either ROL and the L's lowercase, and then in brackets the R is uppercase. So again, you want to respect ROI. But understanding ROL can be just as important. So I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about that, but that came from that gang who were all about ROL, return on lifestyle.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I know Brad Peterson quite well. He's a great, great guy.
Of course.
Most interesting new development.
Ooh, I think you probably can't ignore, and I noticed this from the lake yesterday, all of the towers being built right along the shoreline. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Believe it or not, there were not many large towers, so let's say 15 stories plus, that were actually built in the Lower Mission, so the flats outside of downtown or to the right of the bridge when you come into Kelowna. In the past, there was only one tower. It went into receivership, ultimately was developed by the Aquilinis, and turned into a wonderful heart of what's called Sopa Village or South Pandosi. Sopa Square is the name of the building. Now you've got a number of them. You've got a project by the Stober family called Movala. Incredible. A project by Cressy across the street called Caban. Phil Milroy's giant project that we just talked about that has multiple towers. And then just down the road, Mission Group building what's called Aqua. So you look at the lake now, or from the lake, you look at that area and you look at a half dozen to 10 large towers, 15, 20, 25 stories along the lake line. And that, you would expect that maybe downtown. You wouldn't necessarily expect that in, call it a secondary neighborhood, more of an urban neighborhood or a beach community.
Well said.
Yeah.
What else to keep an eye on up in the Okanagan?
Yeah. So, I think like anything, if you think about market cycles and, where the real estate market is at here, certainly I think there's not as much honesty from those that work in the real estate sector, maybe on the toughness of the market. And we've got about 10 months of inventory, roughly. That's, general across the central Okanagan, condos, townhomes, houses, et cetera. If you kind of carve away at that and you look at great inventory or the things that sell, let's call them iconic properties. And I don't just mean expensive, but if you have something special on any given block or you're just a good property, there actually aren't that many. And those traditionally, and even in this market, are still selling quite well. Now, if they're priced well, again, there's always that caveat with clients. They always feel like their house is worth more than it is. We love what we have and what we've built and where we live. So, I think what I would say is you can't ignore that this is, many have said, the fastest growing market in some surveys and some data, fastest growing city in Canada. It's a small size or medium sized city, depending on how you crunch your numbers. But what I always found interesting, and this is no disrespect to other cities of a similar size, but when you stack Kelowna up against cities of that 150 to 200,000 range, the list falls off pretty quick when you think about ROL and livability. And then also you layer in now talent, capital, access to other markets, and sophistication. So I think that's what you've got to keep an eye on, is a city like this is grown up. We came here right at the right time, I think, when it really was coming out of that awkward phase. Now you've had a lot of those underpinnings put in the ground, literally, with buildings and universities and infrastructure, airport expansion, etc. So where does it go next? Well, where it goes next, in my opinion, like any city, is once those people get their roots, like I talked about, they look around. Those entrepreneurs have been here 2, 3, 5 years. And what do they look to do? They look to invest in community, invest in other projects, put a signature stake in the ground, maybe in building a facility. And that's what's happening. And I think that's what then you're going to see now over the next 5 to 10 years happen an awful lot more. And you're going to find maybe the next phase, if you will, the teenager not just has the mustache, but now gets the degree and heads off to school and gets that second level of education and sophistication, maybe has that first sip of wine and experiences a bit of travel and really understands, global and national markets. So I think that's what you're going to see. I just run into that way more often than I do. In the past, Kelowna might get a hard time, if you will, for jacked up pickup trucks and noisy motorbikes and those that came to kind of use and abuse on vacation. You still get a little bit of that, but you get a very different traveler now coming and spending $500 for a dinner at Cedar Creek. And, that level of sophistication that we might see in many markets around the world. Keep an eye on that.
So, Richard, it's no surprise to me that you do as well as you do in the real estate field. And, I've known you a long time, and how you've networked yourself both internationally, but also locally now. I think you're a real ambassador for Kelowna and the Valley area.
So, well, it's also kudos to you. And I know it's your podcast, but for those that don't know, Thane is an incredibly generous individual when it comes to community and mentoring. And that goes back to the first day that I sat in your office in Metro Vancouver, and you took the time and introduced me to now many friends and business partners that I have. And we've done some things back and forth. I realized you also strongly encouraged me to get into philanthropy, and you had done it by writing many checks back then and still today. So thank you for that, Thane. It means a lot. And it's a huge part of my success today is actually what you've done.
Well, much appreciated, Richard. I appreciate that. And listen, thanks again for your time. I think the listeners and the viewers of today's session will really enjoy this session and when it's published in a few weeks. But thank you once again. Let's wrap there. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. Been a great session with Richard Deacon. You'll see his website URL and information kind of on the podcast here at the trailer.
And remember, ROL, Return on Lifestyle.
Right on. Thanks, Richard. Have a great one. That was Richard James Deacon, award-winning private office real estate advisor, the world's #1 luxury real estate firm, Engel and Volkers, and also the co-founder with me of Tiger 21 Canada, an exclusive and highly private investor education network for ultra-high net worth families. This episode will be released on BNN Bloomberg, iHeartRadio, and all your favorite podcast streaming platforms on September 4th, 2024. So please stay tuned for that. Again, I'm Thane Stenner, and thanks for listening to the Smart Wealth Podcast. Have a great day, everybody.
The comments and opinions expressed in this podcast are the result of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. and should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF. The comments expressed in this podcast are the results of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. And should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF.